If you've been 3D printing models that require support, you've probably noticed that this can leave ugly scars on your prints. But there is a simple change to fix this, which is to use dedicated support materials. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to use these support materials and more to massively improve the look of your 3D prints. But before that, hi there, I'm Matt, and on this channel I'll be showing you lots of tips and tutorials for improving your 3D printing knowledge and experience. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. In your slicer, as usual, I'm using Bambu Studio. If you want to enable supports for your model, so for instance, I've got this model here, which will definitely need supports because of this center cutout piece. If you head to the support tab here, supports are turned off by default, so you can turn them on. And by default, tree supports are used. So if I slice with that turned on, you can now see there's supports filling the middle part and also these holes, which will be used for magnets. If you slide the bar on the side down, you can see where the supports are. Anyway, if you head to the support type, you can see there's normal, auto, normal manual, and tree manual. For flat objects like the one I've got here, normal supports are better than tree supports, whereas if you've got something more organic shaped like a sphere or a character, then tree supports are normally better. I'll show how to use the manual settings later. So I'll switch the support settings to normal, and another setting that's here is the on build plate only. I normally make sure this is ticked. Again, it's not ticked by default, because if necessary, you'll have supports printed directly on the model, not just from the build plate, which can be annoying and leave even more scars. So unless you know it's absolutely required for your model, just tick on build plate only. If I add a more organic model to another build plate to show you tree supports, such as this spiky sphere, I can change the supports to tree and then slice this plate. You can see that tree supports are much more organic, so they can curve around the surface, so give much better supports for something like this. But in all cases, you can use tree and manual supports interchangeably, so if you wanted to use manual supports for this, you can. It just might be more effective to use tree supports. For tree supports specifically, there is an extra setting too, which is support critical regions only, which again is off by default, but if you tick this, you will have much lower amount of supports generated, which you can see here for this model. I wouldn't recommend ticking this setting for every model you have, but if you know you can trust your overhangs and you know you'll have good quality regardless of supports, then you can tick this to save filament and print time. Personally, I'll check the model with this setting ticked and not ticked just to see what it looks like in the slice preview. If I think it looks alright, then I'll just print it like that. If not, I'll make sure it's not turned on. Tree supports also come in different styles, so by default I believe tree organic is used. However, there's tree slim, which as the name suggests gives slimmer trees which can save filament and print time, however at the cost of support strength. If you do want stronger tree supports, then there is a tree strong option, and there is also tree hybrid, which I believe use a mixture of tree supports and normal supports. So if I reset this back to the default tree style, another setting you can see here is the threshold angle, so by default it's set to 30 degrees, but if you increase this, then more supports will be added to your model, and if you decrease it, less supports. So if I set it something crazy like 60 degrees, and then slice, I'll probably have a lot of supports on my model now. Which, yep, the supports are basically going all the way up the side of the model, and I believe before the support usage was 7 grams of filament, now it's like 19 grams. So obviously it isn't recommended increasing the threshold angle as much as I did, but there might be a case where you need it for very intricate and delicate models. So I reset the angle back to the default as well. So I mentioned earlier there are these manual settings too. So if I set it to normal manual, for instance, and then slice, you can see there aren't any supports generated, which might look weird, but that's because you have to manually paint these on. So in Bambu Studio with the model highlighted, here is the painting supports tool, or L shortcut on the keyboard apparently. And like with fuzzy skin and painting in general, the same tools are available here, so you can paint supports onto wherever you want to. This is actually useful for my model here because I don't want supports for the magnet holes, they don't need them, they're quite small and I trust the bridging to be able to handle it. It's only the center part I want the supports to be on, so if I just go on the fill option and click on the middle, you can now see the center part is filled. I could also just individually paint these magnet holes, but I'm not going to. So with that done, if I now slice, you can see the supports have selectively been added to the center cutout, which is what I wanted, which is great. So you can use this to manually place supports on parts of your model, which might be useful like in my case where I'm trying to exclude certain parts to have supports, or maybe the opposite, maybe the software isn't adding supports where you want and you want to paint on some extra supports. Likewise, this can apply to tree supports too, it's not just for normal supports. So now for the most important part of the video, I'll show you how to use dedicated support materials. What I mean by this is use a material that doesn't stick so well to your main material so you have nice clean support removal. For instance, if you didn't know, PLA and PETG don't stick well to each other, so you can use them as support interface materials for each other. So if you're printing with PLA, then you can use PETG as a support interface material, and vice versa. I tend to mostly print with PLA, so in this example I'll be showing the use of PETG as the support interface, but it's the exact same if you were doing it the other way around. So first I'm going to make sure I add a second filament and set it to being PETG. It doesn't matter what type, just put PETG HF from Bambu. So the settings you want to look for are under the support settings again, and there's filament for support section. So there's two options, which is support/raft for the base, and then support/raft for the interface. And with default settings, these filaments will be the same as the filament you're printing the model with, so this will be PLA for PLA. We're mostly looking to change the support interface material, not the base, because we don't need the whole supports printed in the other material, because that will be wasteful and generate a lot of filament changes. It's only the interface we need to change, which is normally only 2 layers thick, so minimal filament changes are happening, especially for flat models. The only instances where I can think you would change the whole support material is if you're printing TPU with PLA supports, or if you're using PVA supports, which are water soluble. I haven't actually used this, so I don't have any experience with this, but you would change the whole support to be the PVA in this case. In every other scenario, just change the interface material. So if you click on the drop downs, you can see it's asking if you want to set the interface material to PLA or PETG. So in this case, because we're printing the model in PLA, if we change this to PETG, this pop-up then comes up which asks to change some settings, specifically the top Z distance and interface spacing, as well as the interface pattern. I don't know if all slicers do this, but Bambu Studio does it at least, and I'm pretty sure Orca does too. So click the S to this to apply these settings. So specifically it's the top Z distance here, which is set to 0, and the interface spacing to 0, 2, as well as changing the interface pattern to this rectilinear. This is so there's 0 space between the support material and your main print. This is so you have a snug fit between your support material and your main print, which gives the best surface finish. So if you just try this with PLA on your PLA model, you will probably not be able to remove those supports. They'll essentially be fused to the model. So just something to be aware of. Anyway, if I now slice the model, you can see it's now a multi-material print. So there's a prime tower and also some purge waste. And if you scroll the bar down on the side, you should be able to find the layers where the support material is used. And here you can see it for these 2 layers. It's a good job I used red so you can see it really clearly in the slicer. And as this is a flat model, only 3 filament changes are happening, so not much waste is produced. Whereas if I compare this to a spiky ball here with tree supports, there will likely be a lot more color changes and waste produced. I was right, you can see there's 51 filament changes for this and 20 grams of purged waste. That's without even adjusting the purge volumes as well. So half as much purge waste as there is from the model itself. And you can see for all the little bits of red on the model, there are a lot of interfaces that need to have the support filament swapped at. So using these dedicated support materials for these organic shapes like curved surfaces isn't ideal. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it's up to you if you don't mind the waste. Or you have a multi-nozzle printer such as a Snapmaker U1 or a Bambu Lab H2C, then the purge waste is completely offset at least. Speaking of purge waste, you do have to be very aware of this, especially when you're doing PLA and PETG mixes, because you need the purging volumes to be sufficient, otherwise you'll get cross-contamination potentially in your nozzle or on your print itself, which can lead to poor model quality and potentially even ruining the whole print. So if I head to the purging volumes here, Bambu Studio probably won't account for the fact there's 2 different materials, which you can see here. It's just giving default color change values. It isn't accounting for the fact they're 2 different materials, so these purging volumes are way too low. If you're purging between PETG and PLA, I'd recommend quite high purging volume, at least 600 millimeters cubed, but higher is probably recommended. So maybe 800 would be better. This should prevent any cross-contamination in single nozzle printers at least. However, if I re-slice with these purging volumes, the waste is going to be a lot higher. Yeah, it's now more than the model itself, so now it's 50 grams of purged waste and 40 grams of the model. This is further evidence to probably not use these dedicated support materials for curved objects or ones that require a lot of supports, especially for single nozzle printers. To make your life a bit easier, there are dedicated support materials that you can buy, so Bambu Lab sell a few different varieties, one of them being this one, which is support for PLA and PETG, so you can use it for both. It's quite a flexible material. I like using this one because it makes the supports really easy to remove. The main downside being it's quite expensive, so for half a kilogram, it's around £30, so probably like $40. But because you're only using it for the interface layers, it will last a long time unless you're printing a ridiculous amount of things. And because it's a Bambu filament, if you have Bambu Lab printers, it has RFID, so it'll load all the parameters and purging volumes, for instance, into Bambu Studio, so you won't have to worry about messing around with them. If you're wondering what this actually is, according to the MSDS on Bambu Lab's website, it's mostly TPU, with PETG and some unnamed additive in there, which explains why it's quite stretchy. If you want something a bit cheaper, Bambu Lab also sells this one, which is support for PLA only. Like that last one I showed you is for PETG also. This one's just for PLA. It's a lot cheaper. It's around £15 for half a kilogram. This behaves more like PETG when you're removing it, so it's a bit harder to remove sometimes, but it still does give clean interfaces. I actually, for the longest time, thought this was just PETG, and then I looked at the MSDS and it's PCTG, which is modified PETG, I guess, which makes sense why it feels and prints pretty similarly. If you don't want to use those dedicated support materials, then obviously you can just use regular PETG, which is cheaper and easier to use, to be honest. In my experience, it's a bit harder to remove as an interface material, but that's a worthy trade-off if you're saving a lot of money. And likewise, if you're printing with PETG, then you can use PLA as a support material, which is super cheap and easy to use. Before ending the video, I'll just quickly show some comparison prints using support material and without using support material, so you can judge for yourself if this is worth it or not. Spoiler, it's definitely worth it, even with a single nozzle printer. This one was printed with default support settings. You can see it's like quite a rough surface. Meanwhile, these two were printed with dedicated support material. This one was using the PLA and PETG support material that I talked about that Bambu Lab sells. And this one was done using simple PETG as an interface. These are basically the same. It was easier to remove the support from there than this, but overall the same result. And as you can see, this is much better than the default version. So I'd highly recommend doing this if you have the chance. And just for completion, here's a curved model, that spiky ball I showed, that was printed using support material. As you can see on the bottom, it didn't make a huge difference. I printed this on my Snapmaker U1, so waste wasn't a problem for me, but quality-wise, I don't think it's worth it compared to not using support material at all for it. So there you have it, a pretty simple way to improve your support interfaces using dedicated filaments. If you learned something new, drop a like and a comment on this video, and while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!